I'm Dan, Taxation is Theft Behrman, and yeah, this is my, I promised myself I wasn't gonna get all political, but then I started drinking energy drinks with lots of caffeine, and now I'm just mad at the government. This isn't what the talk about, but this isn't what the talk is about, but I'll give you a little bit of insight into why I did this. As I was a political activist and I was running around with the libertarians talking to people about economics and really boring stuff, I got a lot of pushback from people who were just like, I'm not interested in politics. I don't understand monetary theory. Like, I don't care about, supply and demand. I just want to go to work and pay my bills and live my life and get married and have kids and all this kind of stuff. So this was my way of bringing a political message of freedom to the mainstream without having to actually get political. So with that said, what I do want to talk about is taxes. So when I ran for president of the United States in 2020, I changed my middle name to Taxation is Theft, and I didn't do it by asking the government for permission, because it's my name, not theirs, right? What right do they have to tell me that I need to ask them for permission? So if you look at the top fundraisers on the FEC report for 2020, you will see my name as Dan Taxation is Theft Behrman. Now, incidentally, you will see my name there as the eighth highest fundraiser on that election, which includes the primaries. And underneath me is Kamala Harris at number 9 and Andrew Yang at number 10. Now, it's an interesting story, because when you look at that, it looks like a libertarian candidate raised $50 million and some change. Well, I didn't do that. I just took a note from the Federal Reserve Bank and raised some money the way they did it, which is basically just to print it. And so a lot of people are like, you're going to prison for that. And I'm like, no, I'm not. There's nothing illegal with it. So it's really interesting when you start understanding what money actually is. It changes a lot of the things we're trying to solve in the liberty movement. So in the liberty movement, there are a lot of people who say, look, I get it. Let's get rid of taxes. Let's cut taxes. Let's do whatever we need to do. But we really do need to pay off the debt. We are creating an environment where our kids are growing up and they're already, tens of thousands, $30,000 in debt by the time they're a week old. And we have to get rid of this debt. We have to, this is a problem we have to solve. And it is a problem, but only if you're paying taxes. So here's some interesting information, some statistics. Right now, the total national debt for the United States is $36 trillion. It's probably going to be 38 by the end of this talk in 10 minutes. The total amount of money in circulation is $2.3 trillion. What's that, like an 18th? So if you were to take all the money that's in circulation and you were to give it to the government, they still couldn't pay off the debt. Now, that's just what's in circulation. There's a lot of money that's hoarded off in vaults in different banks and things like that. Something like 80% of it is overseas. It's not even in the country. That's $18 trillion, which is a little bit more than half. We're getting there. Gold. Everybody's like, gold is like, that's what our money used to be backed by. Gold is like, it's good, solid money. We should reinstitute the gold standard. Gold is great, right? There's various sources, different banks and other world economic think tanks have come up with a number of, they all agree it's somewhere in the realm of about 10 million ounces. That converts into like some metric tons. I don't know what it is. Ounces is a weird, like million. It's a weird way to measure things. But I did that because we know that the street value of gold, everyone knows, is about $2,700 per ounce right now, $2,500, something like that. Anyways, if you work that out, that's about 27. Let's go with 2,700 per ounce. That's $27 trillion. So what that means is, if you take all of the world's gold, which doesn't even belong to the United States government, and how in the hell would they ever acquire that by peaceful means? I have no idea. That's a whole lot of taxes. If they did that, they would have $27 trillion, and if you coupled that with the 2.3 in circulation, you're still only at 30. So the question is it even possible to pay off this debt, right? And then there's a question of why would you want to? Because we look at the debt, right? We have household debt, right? We have credit cards. We borrowed money to buy a house or a car. And we know if we don't pay off these debts, the bank's going to come and they're going to take that, right? Well, the reason for that is when we borrowed that money, we created a note. We printed money ourselves. We signed a document that the bank gave us, and that created a note. And that note is just like a Federal Reserve note. It's backed by our promise to repay them in Federal Reserve notes. And if we can't, to repay them in the car or the house that we bought. We literally print our own money out of thin air, right? But what does the government do when they print their money out of thin air? That's actually a misconception. They don't print money out of thin air. They borrow money out of thin air, which is 100 times worse. So here's how it works. The government says we're going to print bonds, and we're going to sell those bonds. And so you can give them Federal Reserve notes, or the Federal Reserve can print, which it's all a big mix-up because they don't have a printing press. That's still owned by the federal government, but for some reason they put the Federal Reserve's name on it, and now those bills belong to the Federal Reserve, and the government's going to buy those bills with bonds. Those bonds are the debt. When we talk about how much money the government owes in debt, it's not just a bank account somewhere. It's not a credit card. It is just like when you borrow money for the car. The debt is the paper that you signed. If you were to somehow get that paper back from the bank and rip it up, there's no way they could ever come after you to repay the rest of your car. That's the contract, that's the note. That's why it's so important to them. So if the government is just printing these bonds, what could the bank possibly take from them that's on these contracts, right? And these contracts are the debt. What would happen if you just tore up these contracts? What would happen if you just tore up this debt? Think about that. Would the Federal Reserve go to the United States government and say, we're going to repossess something? Probably not, because they'd, as much as everybody loves voting for people and electing them and sending them to Congress and trusting that they're going to do the right thing, that's not going to go over too well with the American people, right? Okay, but what if they pay the debt? What happens? So remember, they give these bonds to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve now has this deposit in their bank, which they can say, oh, we're going to issue notes against this money, these bonds that we have in our bank. So when one is created, the other is created. That means when you pay off one, you pay off the other. So if you were to reverse that exchange, give these Federal Reserve notes back to the Federal Reserve would give those treasury bonds back to the United States government, and both of them would have to rip them up. Okay, now think about this for a second. All of the money in circulation is backed by these bonds that were created for debt. That's how the debt was created. If you pay off this debt, the money that is backed by that debt disappears. Think about that for a second. So when you say pay off the debt, and that's not all the debt, right? Because sometimes what they do is they print the treasury bonds and they say, well, there's already money in circulation, let's do this. Instead of having them print more bonds, we'll sell it for some of the Federal Reserve notes. We'll print some more bonds and sell it for some of the things that are already out there in circulation, and then people put them in their retirement accounts, which literally means they're investing in inflation. So if that's your retirement plan, I guess, the U.S. government has a good history of being pretty consistent with their inflation, so I guess that's a safe bet. But what happens is when they pay off those bonds, the money disappears. And while inflation is a bad thing because it makes prices go up, deflation is also pretty bad. And the reason for that is, we think about inflation, prices are going to go up. Eventually our wages might go up, right? The money has to trickle down. And once it trickles down, wages go up. But the money doesn't like to trickle down because the government doesn't let it. As soon as it starts trickling, there's taxes. Every level it trickles down, there's more taxes, right? So the government keeps taking it. At what rate? Well, if you were to sum up all of the government's take, and we're talking about the federal governments, the state governments, the local city governments, county governments, it comes out to about $9 trillion a year. The total sum of the American payroll is about $8 trillion a year. So if you do the math, it comes out to about 88%. 88% of everything that hardworking Americans earn is given back to the government every year. Okay, now go back to this other number for a second. If they're taxing $9 trillion a year, and there's only $2 trillion in circulation, two and some change, they are taking all of the money in circulation out of circulation and passing it through the government 4 times a year. So if they were to stop spending and continue collecting, and of course we imagine that if they stop spending, they'll stop collecting, but that's not going to happen. Where are we going to have our money? Where does our money come from to circulate? Because ultimately we pay our taxes and then the government spends it and it trickles down and we get it. Who do they spend it on? They spend it on the welfare programs. There's quite a bit there, but they spend it on the military contractors. They spend it on the private contractors. They spend it on other businesses, and eventually it comes down to us. And when you hear liberals and leftists complain about, wages never go up, why don't wages go up with inflation? Well, because you're last in line. Unless you're working for the government, they can inflate the wages. So this is another interesting thing about inflation. A lot of people think printing money is inflation. Printing money causes inflation, but the act of printing money alone is actually not inflation. And you can use an analogy to say, what if the government printed $100 trillion in cash right now? Would prices go up? Well, if everybody knew about it, yes. But what if they took that money and they just stashed it away in a vault and nobody knew that it was even there? Would prices go up? Nope. Why not? Because the money's not there. So it's not the printing of money that's the problem, it's the presence of money that's the problem. And so if the government were to take all of the money out of circulation and put it in their vaults, even though the money's still there, we would see deflation because it was inflated because it's in circulation, and it would deflate as soon as they take it out. Prices would come back down. But where would it come down first? The people who aren't getting their money from the government, right? Because companies are going to say, hey, we paid all our money in taxes. We don't have any money to pay our employees. We're going to start lowering our costs, right? So, and then you have farm subsidies that are probably getting their money directly from the government. Their prices aren't going to come down too fast because they're still getting paid. Why would they lower their prices? So taking all this into consideration, is paying off the debt, giving all of our money to the government, really the answer to the problem? Or is the problem the fact that the government has the ability to steal from us? They create some imaginary debt, they create debt from thin air, and then they tell us we have to pay it. There's an interesting, let's call this a thought experiment about slavery. What is slavery? It's the extraction of labor, right? Like if you think about people who own slaves, it's not like they're getting high on the fact that they own people and they keep them in captivity. No, they're benefiting from the extraction of labor, right? I don't have to pay these people, I get their labor out of it. So now imagine you have a society where most people live off grid, they provide for themselves, they grow their own food, they have their own power and electricity, they pull water out of the ground from the rain. They don't need the government, they don't need the government's money. They're all fine. But then somebody who's got a friend, some evil, greedy capitalist is like, I'm going to build a factory. I need thousands of workers in my factory, but nobody wants to work in my factory because why would they trade this amazingly simple life where they have everything that they need to go work in a factory for 8, 10, 12 hours a day for me? Why would they trade that? What could I possibly give them? But if this evil capitalist were to say, I know a senator, let me go talk to him. And the senator were to say, well, what if we imposed a tax on all these people? And that tax could only be paid in a currency that only the government can create. And we'll make sure that you have that currency to pay those people, and they can use that currency to pay their taxes. Well, now all these people who were just living the happy life off away from the government, not having anything to do with this factory or the government or taxes or anything else, they're going to be kicked off their land if they don't come up with tax money. So now they're like, okay, well, where can I get some tax money? Oh, I have to go into town and get a job. I have to work for this factory. Okay, I mean, I guess if that's the only thing I have to do, or they're going to take my kids away, my family, my house, my food, I'm going to be forced to, have less land and I don't know what I'm going to do. Just eat berries, wander around for the rest of my life. If that's my only option, that's basically like homelessness, right? If that's my only option, I guess I'm just going to go into town. I don't know how to fight this. I don't have an army to fight the government. I'm just going to go get that job, and I'm going to get that money so that I can pay the taxes so I can keep my house. So this person was just living just fine, and now they have the same amount of stuff. They have the same land, the same family, the same food, the same crops, although they probably can't spend much time taking care of their crops because they're always working in the factory. So the only thing that they don't have anything more. They have the money, but they have to give it right back to the government. But all of their labor has been extracted from them. So think about this. The taxes are the forced extraction of labor. They force people to get these jobs and extract their labor. And we're giving all this money to the government. I say the solution is a little bit different. Stop giving them the money. Take the money that they do have. A lot of libertarians are against social programs and taking money from the government in general, subsidies, whatever else. I say no. Take all of it. Every opportunity you have, take money from the government. The trick is, don't become dependent on the government, because that's socialism. That's what they want. Don't become dependent on the government. Just take everything that they have, swap it out for anything that they can't take, gold, silver, crypto, anything else. Because ultimately, this dollar that they created by borrowing out of thin air, it's going to collapse. It's inevitable. It's going to happen at one point or another. And you don't want to be stuck with it, right? Like musical chairs. Just get rid of it, get anything else that you can, and let them default on their debt. It's their debt, not ours. We didn't borrow anything. I don't have anything to show for that borrowed money. That's the only way out of this. And taxation is theft. I'm getting kicked off the stage, so thank you for listening. Have a good night. I'll see you guys at dinner. Oh, questions? Oh, we're doing questions. All right, questions. Yes.
Right, I'll show when the microphone comes over. I don't have any solid information on this. Do you have any opinions or information about how much gold is or is not in Fort Knox?
Whew. So the last time it was audited, I think, was in the 70s, I think under Nixon. There was another audit in, I want to say in the 90s, 2000s, where they went back and they basically said, well, the door looks like it hasn't been opened even though the seal's been broken, so we're just going to assume that it's the same amount in there from the last audit. There are, if you Google it, excuse me, don't use Google, use an internet search engine. There are a few people who have really dug into that, and there's some information out there that documents a lot of that. I know there's one really good website that has lots of citations and sources and government documents. But my assumption is when the United States created those treasury bonds, and they gave them to the Federal Reserve in exchange for this fake money, those notes are still notes. They're still, even though it doesn't say payable to the bearer on demand anymore, they're still notes. They're still redeemable for what they're backed by, which is treasury bonds. And the treasury bonds are redeemable for whatever is legal tender, which of course, it's this crazy cycle of like uselessness, right? But if you're the Federal Reserve and you have a special agreement with the United States government, it would be kind of easy for them to say, hey, we have all these bonds. You owe us a lot more, just give us the gold. Which is how they used to settle the international exchange without having to go through an actual exchange. So that's basically what that gold is for, and I'm pretty sure, my personal opinion is that there's not a whole lot in there. Yeah, oops, yes.
Can you help me understand how the yield is like arrived at on the 10-year note? Like, oh, thanks, sorry. Like in the bond markets, how, is it because they're buying the debt, right?
Yes, so basically the government creates these, and it's not just the government, right? These are just bonds in general. Like companies can issue bonds, right? But you would buy a bond from a company under the assumption that they're going to be making profit, right? So if your retirement fund has some stock in there and that company's like, I don't know, like a phone company or a beverage company, and they pay dividends, or they have bonds and you have the bonds, you're going to buy them at a low price, and they're going to pay off at whatever face value is going to be. There's like some sort of arrangement like that. The government bonds are basically the same thing. You can go buy, I don't know if they still do this at banks, I never bought them, but you used to be able to walk into a bank and just say, give me some of those bonds. And there's different classes of bonds, different values and everything. But you buy them, let's say it's a $100 bond, you might buy it for $70 or $80. And then after, they'll tell you, on this date, that's when it's matured, and you can come and get the full $100 from it. But that investment is basically, it's backed by the government's profit, which is what? How much they can steal. So that's basically all that is. And yeah, there's exchanges that'll like trade those things, and there's derivative markets and everything. A lot of that stuff's just number games and like traders trying to figure out how to like, how do we make money, stocks and options and all that stuff. But yep.
Well, is that what they mean by betting on the debt, or betting against the debt?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the possibility that that bonds are not going to be paid. So like if you have bonds in a company and they file for bankruptcy, they're not going to pay back their bonds, or they might pay a fraction of what's owed.
How do you bet against that?
There's derivative markets. I don't know exactly how that stuff works, but like people can like the same way you can short stock. I think you can do it with bonds. And I guess some of them have variable rates and other stuff too. So I'm not an expert on that kind of stuff. But
you can short sell bonds, by the way.
Yeah, there you go. The whole that whole market is crazy, because they're just like, okay, we have a thing. Let's figure out what kind of math games we can play to and like people who are investing in it. You have day traders who are like, oh, that sounds cool, I'll make some money on that. They all lose their money, and then the institutional investors who came up with the program are like, yeah, house always wins.
But if there were a credit freeze, then how would that bode for like the stock market? Like this is kind of a big theme of why I wanted to be here this weekend, to kind of understand that better. Like the fact that we are illiquid, that this country is illiquid.
Are you saying when the government runs out of money?
Yeah. Or they can't sustain the debt.
That'll never happen. They'll just print more. I mean, that's like, they'll threaten to shut down the government, and if you look up the history of that, it's like they've been doing it since I think the 70s, and they've done it like, I don't know, 30 or 40 times. But that's just them threatening us to make us go along with it, right? Because they could just do it behind closed doors, and then we'd all be pissed off. They have to get us to go along with it, because ultimately there's a lot more of us, and they need us on their side when they make decisions like that. Otherwise, there would be riots in the streets. So, yeah, go ahead.
So you're thinking that that this fiat currency, as we know it, the U.S. dollar, can go on indefinitely?
They're always gonna print more. So if they get to a point where they don't have any, they're gonna print more. And what they've always tried to do is they'll prevent that by happening by taxing. One purpose of taxation is to make sure that we're all working and doing our jobs, right? 0% unemployment. They like that, just like slave owners like that. But the other purpose for it is to slow down inflation, because they could just print everything that they need, but that's going to make inflation go faster, and that's when you get hyperinflation like we've seen in other countries. Then their entire currency becomes useless, and people don't want to use it at all. And they've done that in the past, and they use legal tender laws to say, no, you have to take it. Even though it's worthless, you have to take it. But they use taxes to slow that process down. And you'll hear, the Federal Reserve always saying, 3% inflation is a very healthy number. Yeah, because that prevents hyperinflation, and sometimes they'll go above it or below it. But that's what they're doing. They're trying to prolong inflation. But if they get to a point where they're like, we don't have enough in the treasury, we can't cut spending anywhere because we don't want to lose space on all these programs, they'll just print it. And eventually it's going to get out of hand. Is that better? Awesome. All right, any other questions? All righty then, I'm glad I got the new microphone for that. All right, thanks guys. See you at dinner.